Well, welcome back, everybody. Good afternoon. So our next presenter has been at Calmback Media for 20 years, working for Model Railroader magazine, as well as developing and launching Model Railroader Video Plus and the new train.com membership website. He is a former high school English teacher, and he continues to use his classroom skills to create videos, magazines, and books to teach others how to build better models and model railroads. To show us how to weather Rapido's new Haven passenger car, please welcome David Popp.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. What you're going to see today is actually a compilation of video that we shot last summer during what we call summer camp. And summer camp is usually a 1 or 2 week long period on MR Video Plus, where every day we have another day at summer camp and we do model railroad stuff. Well, last year's summer camp involved building a whole New Haven passenger train, including the locomotive and a switch tower and all sorts of other things. But I extracted all of the video for the passenger car weathering project straight out of there. And so you're going to hear some references to summer camp once in a while. Don't be put off by that. In reality, this is all about weathering the Rapido New Haven passenger cars. And so is it Bruce or Brad? Go ahead and roll film. Wake up, kids. It is time once again for summer camp. That's right. This is not the camp where you go hiking and canoeing and horseback riding. This is the camp where we do cool model railroad stuff, such as structure building and weathering and detailing and decoder installations and all sorts of other fun things. All right, so what are we doing for camp this year? Well, I have been in a New Haven mood, not surprisingly enough, because a couple of months ago I did a review on this New Haven diner from Rapido Trains, and I liked it very much, but I had a wonderful time doing research on it. Matter of fact, so much fun that I renewed my subscription to the New Haven Historical Society, and so I have been reading back issues of the Shoreliner, learning even more about the New Haven than I knew already, as well as digging through my library of books to take a look at other pictures and cool things to inspire me for the projects that we're going to do here. Now, even though I had been a New Haven modeler in N-scale, over the years I have been amassing slowly a quantity of New Haven well, rolling stock for the most part, locomotives and rolling stock in HO scale. Will I build a New Haven layout someday? Probably not right now, simply because of the fact I've got the Olympia project going in the basement, and that's about all the space I have for it. However, it doesn't mean that we can't work on some New Haven models here for summer camp and then take them back to the MR&T and run them on that layout. That'll be a heck of a lot of fun. So what are we going to do? Well, here we've got our passenger car fleet. Now what we've got are 3 8600 series coaches. These are just your general travel type car. I've got 1 parlor car. This is the Thames River. It's in the older green paint. This was as delivered. And then of course we have our car that we took a look at a while back as the product review. This is the William Brewster. This is one of the diners, and so we're going to work on that as well. Now we're going to work on taking all these cars apart, not only to put people inside, but also to do, well, some unique weathering. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. This photo of the William Brewster, which is the dining car that we have here on the countertop, notice that you've got, your nice stainless steel sides, which is great, but then take a look at the underframe here. Basically what you've got is Rust City going on here. Trucks, all of the gear underneath the car as well. All rusty, but notice that the road grime and the rust doesn't necessarily extend up onto the sides of the car, the fluted stainless steel. This will have a little dust on it, but still this part is fairly clean. Here we have another car. This is a grill car, and you can see again you've got all that rust detail going on underneath the car. The sides, being stainless steel, obviously aren't going to rust, but there's very little dust on them. But other metal parts on the car, such as the stirrup steps here and the end of the car, because of the fact that these are just Corten steel shells, essentially, with stainless steel fluting tacked on to make it look streamlined. That basically is also going to rust. Now notice too, this is something we're going to want to replicate on our cars. Look at the facing plate of the diaphragm here, because these rub against each other. Any paint that would have been on here is long gone, and so these are going to rust up nicely too. Those are all details we want to put on our cars. Now, the easiest thing for us to do then is, instead of having to try and paint all that rust detail on the bottom here, especially on cars like this that have skirting, is to actually take the bottom of the car off and do all of that rust weathering on it separately, and then reassemble the car. And then we'll do the final little details around the ends here, do all of our diaphragm rusting and things like that. We have to take the cars apart anyway to get the people inside, so we might as well use it to our advantage for doing our weathering work. Now, most of these cars will come apart the same way, so we're going to just work on them as a bunch here. And I believe at least all the 8600 cars have interchangeable parts. I believe the other parts are interchangeable too on our diner and our parlor car. So to begin, we're going to come in and just remove the 2 screws, one on each end in the coupler boxes. This is a steam pipe here. We need to make sure that we're careful of that so we don't mess it up. With both coupler screws out now, I can roll the car over. Just very carefully stick my fingers under the underside. There are little tabs in here that have to release. Alrighty, and there we go. Okay, so we've got 1 unit removed. This is all wired in place, so I don't really want to mess with it, which is fine because we're not going to do any painting in here. We're just going to put figures in it later. Now, we don't want to remove the trucks because the trucks are actually wired to the electrical system for the lighting of the car. Fortunately for us, we can just gently push the frame out and, using our other finger, roll the wheel set right up and take it out. We'll do the other side that way too. We need to also then cut little foam blocks to fit into this space so that when we spray this, we don't wind up with any paint in places we don't want it. Now, 3 of these cars are identical, so it's not really going to matter, but notice I've got a cup for each. This one's 8623 because that goes with the road number on this body. Just to make sure that all of the parts get back to the right car, because if any little pieces fall off of here too while we're working on it, I want to make sure it goes back to the car it belongs to, so in those things go. To protect our brass bearings that pick up power inside the trucks, I'm going to fill these spaces with foam temporarily. This is just the remains of pluck foam that came from various cases that we've used for cameras and things for MR Video Plus. And I've got a whole bag of this stuff just laying around still, so cut off something about the right size. And then we just gently stuff it into the truck to make sure it's protected. There's little tabs in here we want to make sure we don't damage as well, but that's all it's going to take. Just a little guy like that. We'll do one on this end too. All right, that truck is ready for painting. Okay, this is the part where I hope I have enough blue painter's tape. So I've got the wide stuff here, which is approximately 2 inches. We're going to go and protect all of our interior detail so we can paint the bottom. This still is a lot easier than trying to mask it out on the car, if we had the car body still on. All right, and then just wrap the ends, flip it over, and do the same thing. Last but not least, again, to make sure I can keep the car straight, we're just going to put its road number on, 8623, in a place not likely to be hit with paint. Okay, I got 4 of these to go. We're going to do the painting part at the workshop tomorrow in tomorrow's summer camp, but I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these pulled apart. Before we finish up today, we'll work on getting these wheel sets painted. So I have a nice box here that I can just put all of our car chassis in so that I can take them into the workshop tomorrow and do the spraying of the grime on the bottoms. We'll get all of that done, and then we'll bring them back here. We'll put all the people in, reassemble the car bodies, and then take them back one more time to do the final spray work. But there you go. There are 5 cars getting ready for their first painting step. So I thought we'd finish up today by doing some wheel set painting. Now, you've seen this technique before, I'm sure, because Cody started it and I keep using it because it's far faster than airbrushing, to tell you the truth. I've got some Vallejo Model Air US Flat Brown. This is the exact same color we're going to really heavily coat the undercarriages of our passenger cars with to give us that nice rust color, and I've noticed that the wheels on those cars that we've looked at in the photos look exactly the same color. So I want to make sure that they match. We'll do all the outside of the wheel faces first. I'm just using a green micro brush for this, and notice that I am keeping it off of that center hub as best I can. Once the wheel faces are dry to the touch, then you can go ahead and grab them from the side so that we can do the backs of the wheels. And the only reason I do the backs of the wheels is that from certain angles you can see them, and it's distracting when they don't match as the weathering look, because they should. You can paint the axles too if you want to, but they're buried usually so deep in the car I don't have to worry about that. But the backs are easily visible. All right, we've got our box of passenger car chassis here that we're going to take into the spray booth in just a minute to go ahead and do some dirt weathering on. But I thought we'd take a look at the pictures again real quick, just to make sure that our U.S. flat brown from Vallejo is going to be the right match for the grime that we need for the bottom of these cars. As you can see, here's our picture of William Brewster, the dining car again, and the Vallejo number 71026 U.S. flat brown that we're planning on using for this. I like the color. It looks like it's might be not quite red enough, but we're going to get it on the car and we'll find out. Now notice, there's next to no black showing on here, though you still have kind of greasy spots where your journals are on the trucks and things like that, and then you have little grimy bits underneath too. So we'll do multiple layers of airbrushing here, but we're going to start today with a pretty heavy coat of 71026. So let me get the airbrush loaded up, we'll get the cars in the spray booth, and we'll get started. So the Vallejo Model Air products come ready to airbrush, which is great for us. Now that's if we want it full strength. Now, because of the fact that this is a weathering coat, even though it's going to be pretty darn heavy by the time it's done, I've got just a little bit of Model Air in the bottom of my paint jar here. I'm going to come back with putting just enough thinner so the thinner covers the top of the paint. We're going to try that first as a little test. All right, this is just a leftover Starbucks coffee stirrer. Very useful for these sorts of things. Okay, so we've got our mixture of thinned U.S. flat brown in the airbrush. I'm just going to try a little on the cardboard first to make sure that I'm spraying okay. And now we're going to come in and work on this battery box here, or whatever it is. The whole purpose of this is to build it up in light coats. That's a good starting point. You can see the product is kind of hanging around on the edges, but we still have some of the detail. It isn't all uniform color. It doesn't show up all that great in video at the moment because we're not under the ideal lighting for this, but let me hit it a little harder here. There we go. Okay, now that stands out. And that's got about the right look to it. I don't want to go too much darker than that because I don't necessarily want it to be, you know, like I said, a solid brown underframe. It's got to look like it's weathered and rusty, not just painted. Okay, let's work on the truck next. The trucks on these cars have a lot of really nice detail, which you really can't see all that well right now when it's black, but if we come back and then we hit it with a little of this, oh, look at that. All of a sudden those details just stand out nicely. That looks really good. I've moved one of the shooting lights into the room, and you can see very clearly now that that's a nice look. So what we're going to do is take this back over to the book once it's had a minute to dry and just set it up next to there to make sure that we've got the look we're going for, but I think this is pretty good. Okay, for comparison, we'll come back to our photo of William Brewster again. So this is what it looks like with yet another coat of the brown over the top, and now I think we're getting a lot closer, especially when you look at how the details still stand out. Because of the fact that we're putting a weathering coat on, you still get some of the shadows and highlights going on in those parts. I like how the truck looks compared to the truck especially, and I really do think that once we come in and put our light dusting coat yet under the bottom of the finished car to kind of tie everything together, that's going to look really good. On On the back side of the diner, we have to be careful of this little guy right here. This is not necessarily stainless steel, but it is a steel part that has been painted bright silver. We don't want it to be too rusty, so we're going to have to work carefully around that. So one thing this technique really does nicely is stuff like this. Okay, this is a molded part, and all of that grill detail is molded on the top, and then the things behind it are just molded a little deeper into the piece itself. By airbrushing it lightly, you can see that those pieces that are technically behind the screen show through very clearly, and so suddenly this piece has all sorts of life and dimension to it. The same thing is true on this part here, which has this little mesh squirrel cage that protects the belt that runs between the generator and the flywheel on here, and so therefore you can see all of that very, very clearly after we do the light airbrushing across it. Always good to check the foam blocks as you're working to make sure that we still have protected all of the power pickups that go inside these trucks. As a matter of fact, one of these blocks had fallen out somewhere between the house and here, and so I had to replace it with one that I had already used in another car. While working on the cars, in addition to the couplers, I noticed that one other thing I need to do is paint the underbody yet with the car flipped upside down like this, because although from the side it looks fine, there's a lot of other detail going on here, especially these cars have a ton of plumbing in them, and we want to make sure that that looks right from all angles. Not that this car is going to be laying upside down on the layout, but we'll come in and just gently airbrush into those spaces so it looks uniform, and then on the end here too, do both ends same way. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, I've got all 5 of the cars ready now for the next step. I'm going to switch out the color in the airbrush, and we're going to come back and put just a little bit of grease and grime into the places on the car where it should be. We're going to save the dusting work until we get all of the car back together. So we're going to be working around the trucks primarily near the roller bearings here. Now you notice that they are still fairly rusty, just like the rest of the truck, but they are darkened a little bit because there is some grease and oil going on in those locations, and so we want to make sure that we replicate that nicely on our car. This time we're going to be using Model Air 71057, just basic black. A little goes a long way, so we want to make sure that we don't overdo anything. So I've got about that much in the bottom of my jar. Doesn't even cover the bottom. Now we're going to load in about twice as much thinner, maybe a little bit more. Completely cover it. We have to have enough for the siphon bottle to siphon, so we do need to make more paint than we're ever going to use on this part of the project. And put the lid back on. It's off to the spray booth. Now, as I said earlier, a little of this is going to go a long way, but we're going to do 2 things with it. We're going to try and darken up these journals a little bit, but also they've got some spaces here where I've got way too much rust going on, and I want to bring back some of the original detail. And so we're going to use this, what I call a control coat, as it's a very thin mixture of black, which will serve to tone down some of these spots and bring back some of those little details inside the springs and things like that. So let's start here very small. I'm using a double action airbrush, and this is the reason why, so that I can just control how much paint I'm putting on the location. You might not actually be able to see too much here. The trick is I don't want to build it up too quickly. Let's try this one. All right. Got a little bit in there, not as much as I want, but we're going to let that dry for a second, and then we'll come back and we'll hit it again. Our other side is dry again, so we can come back and just gently darken him up too. So now we can see what we've got. We've got the roller bearings darkened. We also have a little bit more darkening going on the springs in the center part, but we haven't taken any of the brown out of the bottom of the truck frame, and that's exactly what we want it to look like. I think I'm going to add a little bit more black to my mix simply because of the fact that it's taking a lot of work to get us where we need to be, and I'd like to get there a little bit faster. So I'll change the mix up and then finish out the rest of these cars. Okay, new mix. I've about doubled the amount of black. Let's come back and try our second truck here. Okay, that darkened up a lot faster. That's good. There we go. That looks great. I think we've got the right mix. I'll continue on. One other thing you can do to bring out the details is to, well, use the black actually kind of as an accent. And so what I've got here is this equipment box with hinges and latches. And so all I did is just little spots of airbrushed, thinned black paint right over the top of both hinge and latch sections. Makes them stand proud of the rest of this kind of flat brown look of the box there. And I like how that looks. Matter of fact, I'm going to try the same thing over here next to it on the squirrel cage. Let's see how that looks. I don't want too much here, but a little bit to bring out some of the highlight again. There we go. Actually, what I'm trying to do is get it down into that screen so that the screen and the recesses in the screen don't have the same appearance to them, and so that that'll stand out a little better. I like how that looks too. Just little spots around the car, that's all you need to do. Okay, before we put our airbrush away for the day and head back to the basement to work on some other things, I got a couple of spots we need to fix. Got this guy here where the black paint got out of control, and then when I tried to clean it up with a cotton swab, it took off the brown paint at the same time. So we got to redo that. But also, I noticed on these cars, right over the top of the truck springs here, almost all the trucks have a place where no paint got whatsoever, and it's a nice black patch. We need to take care of that because it's going to be noticeable on the cars that don't have skirts. So, starting with our box, I have my red-brown paint back in the airbrush, and it's just a matter of filling in where we've obliterated the detail. Now, we've got a little streak between the new paint and the old paint, and that's okay. I actually kind of like how that looks. Let me rotate that over so you can see it. I like how that looks because it looks like we've got a little rusty wash going on there somehow, some way. Then we've got spots like this that are right over the top of the truck springs that didn't get any paint just based on the way that I was painting earlier, so very carefully. I don't want to come in and I'm actually spraying on the tape above it to get an idea of how much paint I'm flowing through the airbrush. And then we just need to fill it in a little bit like that so it looks like the rest of the piece. I've noticed the top of this brake cylinder too needs just a little shot as well. Okay, there we go. Those parts are fixed. I will keep working my way around these cars until we get them done. And 8615 makes 5. That is one grimy looking passenger car fleet. And before you stop and say no railroad's going to let their passenger cars look like this, well, let me tell you, railroads like the New Haven, as they become more and more strapped for cash, they are looking for ways to cut costs, and cleaning cars is one of those ways, especially repainting things like trucks and underframes that don't necessarily need to be done on any type of regular basis. After all, every piece of railroad equipment on the railroad itself is there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to make money. And that is exactly what these cars would be too. However, let's take a look at our William Brewster photo and compare it to our William Brewster frame, which I've got right here, and see how close we've come to the grimy look of the underbody of the car. So whenever you're weathering equipment, it's always best, if possible, to work from color photographs of the real piece. Here's our William Brewster, of course, and we bring in our car that we've been working on so diligently now, and you can see that, yes, indeed, we actually probably don't quite come as grimy as the original William Brewster did here. And if you're wondering, well, how long did it take for the car to get that way? Here on the bottom is a photograph of another diner on the New Haven, only 3 years after it was delivered, and already the trucks and the underframe are all taking on that nice brown, rusty color. Not quite to the degree of William Brewster some 20 years later, but still, that is basically what we're after. Okay, I've got our undercarriages here. I'm just going to set that aside for the moment. I decided, yesterday we worked on painting these truck wheel sets, and I've decided that, we didn't paint the axles. I'm just going to go ahead and get that done real quick. But then I'm going to break out one of the frames, one of the carriages, because I want to put it back on the body and see what it looks like. I'm really excited to see how this effect turned out. So I have some of our wheel sets here. Basically, we painted the faces and the insides, but we didn't paint the axles. So it's just a matter of take a little bit of our Vallejo brown paint again from the egg cup and work our way around. I can touch up anything that I see on here as well that needs to be touched up yet, but basically it's one dip into the paint, work my way around the axle, and that guy's done. Set him aside there to dry. Now, one thing I didn't show you yesterday that I probably should have is this right here. Okay, so I've got spots where we got paint on top of the wheel tread, and you really don't want that there simply because you put this car in the layout and then that paint is slowly going to get rubbed off on your rails, and now you got rails to clean and everything else. So I've got little blobs like this on various wheel sets that have paint on them. Now I've got just a small pool of Windex in my egg cup here, and I'm just using a micro brush. Windex will take this stuff right off, but I want to make sure I don't glob too much on because we don't want to take paint off of all the rest of the wheel that we've just worked so hard to coat. So notice I just scrub it back and forth, paint comes off. I've got a paper towel here that all I'm doing is wiping off the micro brush on just to get the paint residue off. And then I can work my way around the rest of the wheel. Make sure that, you know, pretty much I've got that paint free. Okay, flip it over. I can see I got a blob on this side right up next to the face of the wheel here. That guy's got to go too. Again, you don't want too much Windex on here because I don't want to loosen up the paint on the rest of the wheel. Okay, our wheel sets are cleaned, painted, and ready to go. Let me clear the deck here. We'll break out our underframes and we'll try fitting one up to a shell and see how it looks. Okay, I've grabbed the 8460. We'll just peel his tape away. Carefully. Now, the trick is to remember how this goes back together. And I realize that the bathrooms are on this end, so the bathroom windows go that way. Should be able to just slip this right back down into place here. There we go. That technique has worked out wonderfully to get that nice grimy New Haven look underneath the car, but then the sides with the stainless steel are still fairly clean. These guys here, these are our little roof vents on top of the roof of the car. You can see here's one down here. Very nice. What I'm working on right now is cutting out masks for these because I've noticed from the photographs in the book, these guys are just sheet steel and they weather differently than the rest of the car does. And so I'm going to have to make some sort of little templates, either mask these off with tape, and I don't really want to do that, but I'm a big fan of card templates. This is an old John Pryke trick, another great New Haven modeler of days gone by, but John used templates all the time for doing airbrushing work, so we're going to make a few of these things to go around some of our roof vents today. I've already got this little complex set of roof vents done on this side of the car, but if I flip it over, and you can see I've got two roof vents over here yet that need to be dealt with. Let me show you how to do this. It's actually pretty easy. And the nice part is, since I have several of these cars to work on here, I've got roof vents that we're going to be able to make duplicates of. Unfortunately, this is the car that's different than the others, but that's okay. We'll start with him. So I've got my vents. I've got just a heavy-duty stock Post-it note here. It's a little better than your typical Post-it notes, but I'm just going to set it over the top of the car so that those vents are kind of in the center. Now, notice what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to press in around the vents with my fingers, making sure not to move the paper from its current location on the car. Then I'm going to take it off. When I flip it over, you can see that now I've got indents for those vents. That is a perfect place to start doing my cutting work, and then we can trim it up a little bit to get around the vents so that we wind up just spraying the vent space and not the rest of the roof. Cutting just to the inside of my indent. I'm also overcutting my length line here simply because of the fact I'm not quite sure how far I need to go for his curved back, but I can see his starting point very clearly. There's that. All right. I'm going to guess it's right about there. These don't need to be exact, so don't worry about them being exact, but it's nice if they have a fairly tight fit. Now I can come back with my template, lay it over the top of my first vent, get it to hook in place. My second vent lines up nicely. Okay, so it looks like my first vent is fine, or my second vent is fine. My first vent, we've just got that little bit of top to clean off yet, so let me get that real fast. That's actually just going to be to finish out my original cut marks there, like so. Okay, that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we make some roof vents. Now, this particular car has got a little different roof vent configuration because it is, even though it's an 8600 series car, it is a different 8600 series car. So what I'm going to do is just write down the number of this car. This is 8640. So that's one set of vents for 8640. Here's my other set of vents for 8640. We're back in the workshop at Kalmbach, and so now it's time to put our little paper masks that we created to use. We're going to start by spraying some more rust color onto the models, and for that I'm going to use good old Vallejo 71026. This is the same US flat brown that we've been using on the underframes of the cars. And essentially what we'll do is we'll rust up all of these metal or sheet metal roof vents first. We'll also work on our diaphragms too, because I've got the masks for those sitting here. We'll get all that done first, and then we're going to come back and do some other weathering on the roof of the car yet, because these look kind of grungy. Matter of fact, if I get the book, we can take a look to see what we need to do. Looking back at our New Haven Color Equipment Guide for examples, you can see that even though that we've got the kind of black painted roof here, over a short period of time that weathers up to kind of a gray, so we're going to need to do a little work on that. There's rust on that particular grill there, but then also down at the far end here, you can see rust on the sheet metal duct that goes off the top of the car for that vent as well. So those are the types of the things that we're going to try and replicate. So we want to make sure that our mask stays where it should. I don't want to tape it because I actually want to be able to try and reuse this for one of the other cars yet. So something about like that. We also want to be careful we don't overspray into that area too much. These shouldn't look like just completely rusty metal. They should still have a little paint to them. But they do need to look rustier than they do now, which is not at all. So just carefully get all sides, because these are 3D pieces, obviously. Now, I got too much paint on here. You're getting a little pooling up on it, but that's okay, because a lot of times on these metal parts, what happens is you get water that pools up, well, you know, kind of hangs on the bottom, and so pieces will rust more aggressively than others just based on where the condensation ends up. Look at that. Our rusty vents are nicely displayed, completely separate from our black roof, which should look different. Okay, working on the opposite end of the car because I don't want to mess up the vents we just painted. I've got my mask. Just gently come in and color the part. And there we go, rusty vent number 2. I've set the coach off for a bit to dry before we handle it again. I've got the diner here and I've got my diaphragms masked off. Remember, these are the plates that rub together, so they're going to be really rusty. I want to try and avoid getting too much rust on the end gate because that should still have some paint on it, but I'm not sure how much rust paint I have left in my airbrush here, but we'll try to get what we can. Now this is going to be a multi-step process for this. We're going to start out by airbrushing it, like you see here. And then we're going to come back and put some powdered pastel on it too, because I want it to have a little bit of that rusty grit to it. Plus I want some variety as well as in the color. They look pretty grungy in the photographs, so we're going to make sure ours matches. I want to get up into the top there yet, because I noticed that from the photos these have pretty much uniformly rusted all the way around. Now that the paint's had a little time to dry, I can slip the mask off. And there you go. You can see we've got the beginnings of our rust. We're going to put some powdered pastels in here to get some different color in, because it's going to have all sorts of different colors to it. But you can see that we've nicely painted this completely separate from the rest of the car end. Still going to put a little grime and dirt on this, but that's looking good. Once this dries up, we'll pull that piece of paper out of the doorway too. Now we need to work on the roof sections of the car. So we've already rusted up the roof vents themselves, but this nice uniform black color on the top of the car, that's not necessarily what we want. If I bring my color photos back in, you can see on this grill car here, for example, that black eventually weathers to kind of a nice little uniform gray with a little dust on the end. We're going to dust up the ends last on the cars, and maybe like you can see here, there's a little dust on the bottom of the fluting. We'll do that detail in a little bit, but right now we want to turn our attention to the gray roof. For that color, I'm going to wind up using some of this. This is number 71055 black gray. This is a nice dark gray color, which I'm hopeful is going to look a little bit different than what's already on the roofs of the cars. We'll see how that goes. The other thing I've got to point out too is the fact that our parlor car is still in the old green scheme, and it has a green roof. So I'm curious to see how the black gray is going to work on that. Now, before we commit to this, I want to do this as a test, and we'll see how our black gray turns out. That's looking pretty gray. I'm going to spray right over the top of my rust detail. I'm going to try not to obliterate it though. So The other thing I want to do is avoid getting paint down into my masking tape. So I'm going to wind up holding the car on its side a little bit so I can spray up at it a little. Also want to keep it off the bottom here too because I didn't tape all the way across. We're just going to go lightly. Now I can see the paint hitting the roof of the car. And I'm pretty sure that this gray is going to be exactly what we want. You know, the irony is I think it's drying the same color as the paint that's already on there. We might need to lighten this up a little bit in order to get it to work. Try this end. Again, I want to be careful not to obliterate all that rust detail we just put into our roof vents, so I'm just going to work around them. And it's okay that the roof is not entirely uniform. I like the fact that it has kind of a mottled look to it. So I'll bring in another car. This happens to be the diner, and you can see there is a huge difference now between the black on the diner roof as delivered and then the black gray that is kind of that weathered look that the New Haven cars took on. So this is our color. Let's get the rest of them done. Now I've got a couple of spots where we had a little rust overspray right there and around here at the base of this particular vent. So I'm pretty sure we can come back with our gray color and just very carefully fill in those spaces. Again, without obliterating the rust that we've already spent so much time putting onto our roof vents. Now on the ends of the cars, because I didn't want to tape onto my diaphragms that we spent all that time doing the rust detail on, because I don't want to damage it, we've got these little slope sheets here, and so it's just a matter of coming in again with the airbrush and doing little spot points. It's okay that some of the original black shows through. Matter of fact, we want that, but we just want to make sure that the roof on the top in particular has a nice faded appearance to it. I'm going to keep plowing through these cars, and then when we come back we'll take the tape off and make sure that everything is cleaned up along the sides. And we've got just a little bit of weathering to do yet today on the very ends of the cars, and then these will be ready to reassemble once we put the passengers inside. So we're going to go back to my favorite dusting color right now, which is Vallejo's number 71-122 US Desert Armor. This is a good little color for doing dust work, especially if you thin it out a bit. Got that. We'll take the other one off too, just very carefully. All right, these cars are coming along nicely. Subtle is the name of the game this time. We want to come in and put just some dust along either side of the diaphragm here on the walls, back walls of the car themselves, because basically what happens is as the car rides with another car in front of it, spray from the wheels gets kicked up in between the two cars and the wind circulating around, and it usually gets these areas dirty. The other thing too is that if the car goes through the car washer pretty much is only going to get the sides of the car, which would be the windows and the stainless steel that you see here. And so therefore the ends pretty much, once they're dirty, they're dirty. Okay, here we go. So I am working with very, very small amounts of paint, and we're going to do this as carefully and subtly as possible. It isn't going to take much. Okay, there's just a dusting in there. I don't know if you can even see it on the video. Come back with the other side of the car. Just very subtly spray in there. So as a comparison, the coach that's on the left has the weathering on the ends. The coach on the right does not. So you can see that all we've done is we've hazed it up a little bit. There's a couple of little blemishes on the ends of both of these coaches. These were both used, and those blemishes actually look pretty darn cool. So it looks like something hit the car there at some point and left its mark, which is good, because these things should look like they have had a long service life. Now notice up to this point I have not put anything on the sides of the cars. Remember, we spent all that time doing the rust detail for the undercarriage, which is going to look nice by itself. And again, from most of the photos I've seen, these cars on the side stayed fairly clean all the way through without a lot of grime. And so I'm going to just leave them that way. We put weathering in the places where weathering would occur on these stainless steel cars. We don't necessarily need to put weathering on the fluted steel itself. We don't want to ruin this nice kind of stainless steel look. We have to put some more rust detail on the ends of the diaphragms on the cars. The facing plates, remember, are very rusty because they rub together as the train rolls along. Now, even though I've taken all the glazing out of the windows here, the glazing in the doors is glued in, and I didn't bother removing any of that. Up to this point, that hasn't been a problem because we've masked the sides anyway. However, in the fact that we're going to be spraying dull coat here, I don't want it to get onto the clear window glazing because it will haze it. The end door is open. There is no casting on the inside, and so therefore we need to just take a little piece of tape. Doesn't need much. It just needs to block it temporarily until we get the spraying part done. In order to protect the outside of the windows when we spray this, all I need is a piece of paper towel that we just wrap around something like that, tuck it up inside the car body, and now I can spray away without any danger of getting stuff on those windows. Now this is going to be one of those deals where watch fast or you're going to miss it. So basically we just need a little shot right there. We don't want too much. Let that dry up. We'll get the other side. All we're doing is we're creating a surface that has tooth to it because the dull coat, being a flat surface, creates kind of a nice gritty texture for our powdered pastels to adhere to. All right, we're going to use 3 different AIM colors here, or Monroe model colors. We're going to use their dark rust, we're going to use their dark earth, and we're going to use some light rust by the time we're done too. So these just come in little square containers. We'll take the lids off. Got my rusts. Let's start with our dark rust. This is just an exercise in applying the pastel to the car in kind of a scrubbing motion. Blow the pastel off of surfaces you don't want it on. In fact, that's another thing I learned the hard way too. Originally I was just holding the cars upright to try and keep the pastels flat on the surface, and it actually wound up in all sorts of places I didn't want it, like on the roof and down the front ends. So, all right. This is going to be it looks bad until it doesn't look bad anymore. Okay, so that was our dark rust. Now we go with our dark earth. This is just more of that brown stuff. You get all sorts of rust on steel. You get light rust, dark rust. This is going to try and simulate some of that effect. Finally, we're going to come back with highlight rust. Orange, bright orange rust is usually the newest rust on a particular surface. And notice that I'm just taking some of the powder that's fallen off the car now and just picking it up with the micro brush and reapplying it. All right, our diaphragm looks pretty good. That's what it looks like with the rust applied. This is what it looks like without the rust applied. While this was an improvement over just the shiny, bright metal, this is an improvement over that because of the nice gritty texture we've got. Now, I've already done the other side of this particular car, and so I'm going to take this back to the spray booth and we'll hit it with another coat of dull coat. Back in the spray booth the final time for one more shot of dull coat, just to fix all that lovely gritty weathering in place. This is number 8623. It's one of our coaches. Before I can go ahead and put the window glazing back inside the car and put the shell back on the frame, we've got to do one thing yet, and that's put passengers in these seats, at least some of them, so it looks like there are people in the car. After all, this is a lighted car, and we want to make sure that we show off the interior as best we can. Over the years, Prizer has made a number of seated passenger sets. I have some people left in this one. This was number 14009. I also have a brand new set here, number 14416, full of passengers waiting to go in the cars. And if that isn't enough, I also have this set from Walther's Scene Master line, HO scale seated passengers. Again, these are called festival goers, and you've got a few figures in here like these guys with beer and pretzels. But the rest of these people obviously could be seated in a passenger car without any problem whatsoever. So we'll be able to use most of this set too. Now, it'd be great to be able to use the passengers just as they are, but unfortunately we have to make some modifications to them. If you take a look at the car here, you can see that this is our vestibule area. This is where the floor should be in the car. However, to conceal weights and other things that go underneath the floor, you've got a raised section here, that's this gray area, which has raised everything up. So as a result, our seats are actually molded shorter than they would normally be. So, unfortunately for us then, when we try to position normal passengers who are seated, their feet are, well, they're all in the reclining position there, and that's not necessarily good for what we're trying to model here. So, In order to ride our train, you got to come without your feet so that you're sitting properly, which means we got to clip those guys off. So there's no two ways around this. It's a barbaric process, but it has to be done. So I've got my sprue clipper here. I'm just going to come in and take off the feet about up to the shins, something like that. Sorry, guys. And this is actually a very easy but time-consuming process. All we need to do is put some CA, got it on a micro brush here, on the base of the seat. We come back with our little couple. Give that a couple of seconds to harden, and they will be ready to go to town, or the city, or wherever they're going. So, needless to say, after that short little demonstration, you don't need to watch me go through the gruesome process of making feetless people so they can ride our passenger train. I've got 5 cars to fill here, but that's okay. Let me get some people in these cars. We can put the glazing back in the cars then and put everything back together, because I think you're going to like how they look. Well, that's a lot of leftover feet. However, Steve Oddie came up with a brilliant idea several years ago on another project when he had feet left over from something like this. He built a shoe store over in our Williams Bay area, and then he cut out all the little feet to make pairs of shoes that he put in the display window, as you can see here. One of the things I love about our finished train, and it made it worth all the time I spent putting the people inside the cars today, that is that when you see them lighted on the layout and the train does a slow roll by, you've got all sorts of wonderful interior detail. I just love the fact that in the smoking section on our parlor car, you can actually see the woman who's holding a cigarette. So it really does fit the part. Our dining car looks great with diners in it, and I also added a conductor to one of the coaches too. You can see him standing here as well. So, people inside the passenger cars, definitely the right project for our summer camp series. So, that's going to wrap up for summer camp. I'm going to run the train probably the rest of the afternoon on the MRNT, but don't worry, there's always plenty more to watch on MR Video Plus. We'll see you next time.
Well, that was very interesting. Especially, I haven't touched weathering yet, so that's something that I'll have to watch again. So we do have a few questions here. The first one was, what pressure are you spraying at?
Most of the time, my airbrush seems to work best at the 25 to 30 psi range, and I usually don't change up from that. I am not the quintessential airbrusher by any stretch of the imagination. That is more my, other people that I work with. Cody Grivno in particular is very meticulous about what pressure he's spraying at, but I know what works for me, and that's basically what I do. So 25 to 30 psi, depending on the thickness of the paint, for more than anything else.
Is that the same pressure that you would use for any of or all your cars?
Yeah, pretty much. If I'm airbrushing, it's somewhere in that range. I've got an Iwata Evolution dual action airbrush, and it seems to be that pressure range works well with that instrument. So,
okay. I've got this question, but I don't understand it very much. But what weathering would you recommend for interior of the cars?
Oh, that is an interesting question, because those Rapido cars are lovely. They've got a lot of great detail in them, but it's all colored plastic. None of it is necessarily painted. And in hindsight, if I had it to do again, which I will, because I actually have a whole bunch more of those cars to do, I think I would try dull coating the interior first. A lot of times that shiny plastic, if you hit it with a shot of dull coat, it takes some of that down. And especially because of the fact that these cars have lighted interiors to them, and those lights are very bright LEDs, so you can see in that car very clearly. I would be curious to try that first and see how that would work. Beyond that, probably the best the best course would be, instead of doing weathering on the interior of the car per se, paint the interior of the car, which, you have a whole bunch of different things you can do there, but I wouldn't want to have to try and pull all those seats out, especially since they're all glued in. So dull coating would probably be the first thing. The other thing you could do too, and I've seen this used very successfully, is after you dull coat, you take an ink wash, just some India ink diluted in rubbing alcohol will do, and it'll help fill in all the little cracks and details and stuff that are in the seats, in the other accoutrements inside the car, to give them a little bit more life. So dull coat and a little of the other stuff might be the way to go.
Do you really see through the windows? Like, is it clear plastic or is it glass? Like, do you really see inside?
Yeah, windows are clear plastic, and yeah, you really can see through into the details. I'm glad I spent the time I did putting the people in the way I did and creating little scenes, because they are very visible.
Oh, okay. Another question is, for those that showed up late, what brand of paint do you use?
On that particular project, I was using Vallejo for the most part, all the way through. So I had not used much Vallejo paint, but with testers getting rid of Model Master, well, first Polyscale and then Model Master, I've been looking for another paint to work from. And while Vallejo doesn't necessarily have American Railroad colors per se, you can match all sorts of things. And there are charts out there online that you can find that give you fairly good representations for not only Vallejo, but other brands of paint as well. And what you can, come up with what their color looks like in relation to, say, a Conrail blue or something like that.
Oh, okay. Just by curiosity, what kind of paint does Cody use?
Well, Cody has been experimenting with a whole bunch of different stuff. He also uses a bunch of Vallejo. Matter of fact, we were working on a project this past week in the shop, and he was using a lot of Vallejo for that. And I actually can't tell you. I don't know. He's got collections and collections and collections of paint, and every so often he'll be in the shop working on something, and if he doesn't have to write about it or show it on video, I find that he still has an old bottle of Polyscale that he's using instead of color matching to something new. So,
okay.
but yes, Cody has hoarded a pretty good collection of paint. So.
Okay. I noticed you used AIM powders. Would you use pan pastel?
Yes, actually, I use pan pastel quite a bit for some things. In this particular weathering project, I was using just the regular powdered pastels. I'll tell you, the thing that I really like the most lately is that Monroe Models makes these weathering solutions, which is basically powdered pastel suspended in an alcohol mixture. And we've gotten some really stunning weathering using that material. I wish I had used that on the diaphragms on those cars, as a matter of fact. When I do the next batch, I'm probably going to do that instead. I just really like how it looks when it's done, especially you dull coat it first, you put this wash on, and so the alcohol in the wash reacts with the dull coat a little bit, gives you some natural hazing already anyway to give it some variety, but then it also has the grit of the powdered pastel in there too. Once that gets on the surface also, you really get your eye isn't fooled by a flat surface. So this gives you that kind of gritty, rusty texture. It's very easy to see. Cody uses it all the time for couplers. He uses that technique for couplers quite a bit. But yeah, Monroe Models, they're weathering solutions, and they're very easy to get. Matter of fact, I know too, for those of you who are overseas or out of country, out of the United States, that he can ship the bottle without the rubbing alcohol in it, that just has the powdered pastel in it. He gives you an instruction sheet then on how to mix your own once it gets to you. So basically, go down to your local drugstore and get a bottle of rubbing alcohol and mix it up with this stuff.
On the weathering note, have you tried the AK pencils?
I haven't yet. A couple other people in the building have been using them, and I like the results I've seen on them. I need to get a set. So, but yes, that will definitely be something I would like to add to my arsenal.
On your Christmas list, right?
On my Christmas list. Yeah, no, I give it to my wife, and she'd go, "Here, just go buy it and tell me how much it costs."
Okay.
Which is fine. I mean, I'm perfectly good with that. That'll work.
How many cars can you weather in a day? Like, for example, those those passenger cars. You had 5 of them, I think, or 5
Yeah,
or 6.
I was working on 5 cars there. Here's the tricky bit, is that everything I do anymore, modeling wise, always has a video, an article, a book, or some other thing attached to it. And so we're always stopping to shoot video, photos, and everything else. I've kind of lost track of, hey, you know, if I didn't have to do all those things, how quickly could I get a project done? But I will say this about the cars is I probably wouldn't do the entire project from start to finish, because the Vallejo paint, we have all noticed, it needs a little longer drying time than what we were used to with, say, Model Master or Polyscale or one of the other paint manufacturers out there. It stays soft longer, which is both good if you're trying to remove paint from places you don't want it, or try different weathering effects such as chipping paint or peeling paint. That's a great thing. However, it's not a great thing when you do some weathering and then you try to put mask over it right away within an hour or two of applying the first coat, because chances are really good you're going to just peel that paint right off. It still isn't quite hard enough to handle the masking. So we've had to kind of learn how to work with that a little differently. Definitely with those cars, though, that would probably be a 2-day project, simply to get the weathering coats on the bottom and the roof first, then do all the other little detailing and then put it back together. So.
Oh, that's good to know. We've run out of time.
As
So,
always.
it was a pleasure. So everybody, don't forget to check out the breakout room over at whereby.com/MRL-Aussies, AUSSIES. And David will be there very soon. So
All right.
we're going to take a break and come back with our next clinician.
// Please use the //
Oh, sorry, not backslash, forward slash.
Forward
Sorry.
slash.
Yeah,
Okay.
forward slash. Okay.
I'll be right with you guys. Just give me a second here. I'm holding for Sir Rod Stewart. Yeah, he's a little annoyed because every time we do a show, he's always last on. He never gets on. But if you guys have been watching the NMRAX, I would strongly suggest that you sub to it, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll always know when it's on. And it's a great show. Hold on. Yeah, I'm holding for Sir Rod Stewart. Yes. Yeah. Hi, Rod. How are you? Bill Graham from MRL, Model Railroading Live. Guys, remember NMRX. Yeah, I'm talking about the NMRX, Rod. Yeah, you watch it too, Rod. So Rod Stewart watches it as well. Hey, Rod, listen. Let me just finish this up, and I'll get back to you. Okay? Yeah, I'm not gonna cut you off. I know I hung up the last time. That was not my fault. Relax, just relax. Okay, Rod. I'll be with. I tell you, these superstars. Get the guys model railroading. Hey, NMRAX, sub, like, and hit the notification button. Okay? Okay.